Hello, Wonderhussy here, hiking on a beautiful, bright blue summer day in the San Francisco Bay Area, up Mount Tamalpais. Okay, I guess the locals call it Mount Tam for short. I'm here with my buddy Terry, who doesn't like to be on camera, but you probably remember him from several of my videos. He's my electrician friend who was down helping us out at the Death Valley compound. We both happened to be up here in the Bay Area and figured it was a good day for a hike. Now, this mountain, Mount Tamalpais, Mount Tam, whatever you want to call it, isn't really that high, at least not by my standards. I think it's only 2,579 feet high, which hardly even qualifies as a hill where I come from. But you have to remember, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. Basically, we're at sea level. So there is a relatively great prominence to this mountain, and it has amazing views. In fact, I think we're coming up to some kind of amazing viewpoint where you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, look at this. You can see the entire San Francisco Bay spread out before us. I think if I zoom in, I thought it was the Golden Gate Bridge, but I guess it's the Bay Bridge that connects Oakland to San Francisco. Look at that. That skyline there is the city of San Francisco. How about that? It's hard to imagine all that seething, writhing madness is taking place right over there. And then look over here. There's the Richmond Bridge, and there is San Quentin, the notorious prison where many of America's worst criminals have been incarcerated. Oh, and speaking of prisons, I forgot to point out, there's Alcatraz. Look at that! The Rock. I think that's what they call it. And then in the foreground, just in front of San Francisco, that's Sausalito. My friend Terry here thought I ought to mention that Sausalito is where the recording studio is, where Fleetwood Mac recorded their iconic album Rumors, okay? Their iconic and best-selling album Rumors. Remember that? Of course you remember that. Everybody remembers that. Tons of great music on that album. Tons of great stuff going on down below. But there's also plenty of interesting stuff going on up here on what they call the Sleeping Lady. That's right, in addition to calling it Mount Tam for short, well, Mount Tamalpais is apparently also known as the Sleeping Lady because apparently, if you look at it from above, it has the shape of a sleeping woman. And in fact, the Native Americans in this area had a legend that the way this mountain was created is one of the sun gods kidnapped a beautiful maiden, and as he was taking her, I guess, up to the sky, she tripped over Mount Diablo over on the east side of the bay and fell down here and has been here ever since. Whether or not that's a true story, I can't say. But like I said, there's plenty of other interesting stuff going on up here on Mount Tamalpais, or Mount Tam. Golly, everyone's gonna know I'm not from around here if I keep calling it that. Anyway, there's plenty of interesting stuff going on here. First and foremost, even though it's only 2,500 feet high, there's still a bunch of beautiful hiking trails up here. And so all these rich coastal elitist liberals come up here to hike. And, well, as a matter of fact, back in the late 70s, there was even a serial killer up here. That's right, there was this guy known as the Railside Strangler. And I guess he would lurk in the woods up here and prey on young, solo female hikers. Yikes. Good thing I'm with my friend Terry. And good thing I'm not young. Wow, look how cool the side of this cliff is. I mean, there's these amazing gnarled tree roots coming down. And then the mud washed away in these really interesting patterns. I mean, this is an absolutely beautiful trail. It's a shame about the serial killer. Actually, not to worry. I think they caught him back in the 80s. I think he only operated from like 79 to 81. So all of that's in the long ago past. But This mountain isn't just known for serial killers, it's also known as the home of mountain biking. Okay, this is where mountain bikes were basically invented. I guess some dude from one of the towns down there, Mill Valley or Marin or someplace, he liked to come ride his bike up here on these trails. And so back then everybody just had regular road bikes, but somehow he specially modified his to make it more beefy and able to endure these crazy trails. And well, the rest is history. In fact, there's an entire museum dedicated to mountain biking down in, I think, Fairfax at the base of this mountain. But as if mountain biking and serial killing aren't enough, well, there's also more than one or two plane crashes up here on Mount Tam. And that's why Terry and I are hiking up here today. Okay, I read an article online a couple months ago about this plane crash you can supposedly hike to up here, but they were real stingy with the details. You know, it's a federal offense, I think it's a felony, to steal wreckage from this particular plane crash site because it was a US military plane. So I guess they're just trying to discourage looters, but the plane went down in 1944, okay, 80 years ago almost. I'm pretty sure most everything has already been looted, but if the pictures I saw online are to be believed, there's still quite a bit of wreckage up here. So I did some digging and I did some mapping, and I think I figured out how to get there. Okay, if my intel is correct, I need to split off here. I'm actually following a hike that I downloaded on All Trails that should take me real close to this crash site, if my intel is to be believed. So I guess I just need to take this narrow little trail here that incidentally is closed off to mountain bikers. Sorry, boys. And this will get us pretty close to where we need to turn off trail completely and do some bushwhacking. That's right, there's no official trail that goes to this crash site because, like I said, it's a pretty tightly guarded secret. Okay, so as much research as I did, I don't know that I have the exact coordinate for this crash, so I just gotta pay real close attention because we're getting close to it. But like I said, it's not off of a trail. One of the websites I read said there is a very faint use trail leading off in the direction of the crash, which I guess is probably down in that gully there. I feel like I just watched another YouTube video where these two guys, father and son, hiked to this. And it seemed like it was way more densely forested than this. You know, like big redwood trees. Well, maybe down in the gully. But up here, it's just scrubby little manzanita oaks. Is that a trail? No. Gotta find this trail. Okay, hold on. I think we might need to start bushwhacking here. Golly, this is really tricky to find. That's the nice thing about hiking in the desert. There's not all these dang trees obscuring your view, you know? Up here you can't see a plane crash as easily because it could be, and it probably is, hidden in the dense underbrush. Okay, this is a good sign. We just dropped into this little hidden stand of redwoods. This looks a lot like that video I watched, so that makes me think that we're getting close. I still haven't seen a little trail leading off, though. Should be a little trail leading off to the right that will take us down into that stand of redwood trees, and that's where it's supposed to be. Okay, here we go. Let the bushwhacking commence. Okay, wow, Terry and I were bushwhacking around like idiots in the forest when these two super studly young local guys showed up, shirtless, and asked us if we were looking for the plane crash. And they said, oh no, you're not in the right area. And they showed us to the trail, and it is a pretty well-marked trail going, supposedly, right to the site. Boy, how lucky am I that these dudes just happened to come around. I could have been scrambling around up here all day. Oh, I think I see it. Oh, yeah, look at that. There's a sign right here. Attention visitors, this aircraft crash site is of historical significance. It is U.S. government property and is protected by law. Damage to or removal of any portion of this airplane wreckage is a misdemeanor. Possession of removed wreckage is a felony. Well, I wonder why it's a harsher penalty to possess it than to actually steal it. That doesn't make sense, but either way, I'm not here to take anything. I'm just here to look around. Oh, boys, thank you so much for... See, I told you, these are nice looking guys. Look at them. So adorable and also so helpful. So they led us directly to the crash site, which sadly is right here behind me. And even more sadly, I guess one of those guys was telling me there's an American flag at each spot where a body was found. So I guess I should back up and tell you the story of this plane crash. Now, I know it's going to be hard to believe on such a beautiful, bright blue sunny day, but this was back on November 30th, 1944. So it was cold and it was raining, it was winter, it was in the middle of World War II. It was a very gloomy night. And this huge plane, and they have a picture of it here. I guess this was a PBM-5 Mariner flying boat. Okay, if you know anything about military aircraft, then you might know what a PBM-5 Mariner is. Apparently, it's this giant seaplane. It's a airplane, but it's also a boat, which you can see here in the picture. Yeah, this thing could and did land on water. And so I guess on the night of November 30th, 1944, it says these guys had originally started out in Florida. They flew all the way across country, stopping in lakes along the way, because that's where this plane would land, on water. And then they eventually ended up over here in Alameda. There used to be a big, I don't know if it was this was a Navy plane. I don't know if the base in Alameda was, I guess it must have been a Navy base. Anyway, they landed in Alameda, and then they had just taken off to head to Pearl Harbor. That's right, these guys were going to Pearl Harbor as part of World War II. This was almost 3 years after the surprise bombing there, but they were headed to Pearl Harbor. It was a dark and stormy night, and unfortunately, the plane ended up smashing into the south side of Mount Tamalpais. Now remember, this was a huge airplane. I guess the wingspan was 118 feet, and it could carry 56,000 pounds. So even though, yeah, it looks like there's a lot of debris here on the ground in front of us, and I guess it goes even farther down the hillside, well, it's only a fraction of what was originally here, okay? Since 1944, what is that, 80 years ago? I guess a lot of stuff has been looted. I'm sure the government probably came in initially and cleaned up a lot of the stuff, but there have been looters here, and, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, I guess to get back to the story, on the evening of November 30th, it was a dark and stormy, rainy night, and just before midnight, there's this little kind of like bar hotel up here called the Mountain Home Inn, and I guess the people who run that were just hanging out at home, and they heard this really loud explosion. And they looked out the window and they couldn't see anything because it was dark and rainy and foggy. But first thing in the morning, once the fog lifted, they looked out the window again, and they could see from their house, they could see the flaming wreckage of an aircraft. And so they called the police, and the police didn't believe them because, well, weirdly enough, there was another plane crash on this same mountain the same night, or, well, a near crash. There was another military plane. Oh, yikes, I gotta be careful. Okay, I guess I'll take this little trail over here. I don't want to walk right through the debris field, but Terry said there's a good vantage point over here. Anyway, the police didn't believe this woman when she told them she was looking at a crashed airplane because another plane went down, or almost went down the same night. It ended up having to jettison its gas tank on the mountain, but the plane itself made a safe landing. So they thought she was just talking about that, and they assured her, oh no ma'am, no plane went down, we've already communicated with the Navy, everyone's okay, they did make a safe landing. And she was like, no, I'm looking at it right now, there's a plane on fire. But they didn't believe her. Well, then some other lady that lived up here also called the police, and they didn't believe her either, but by then, I guess word was getting around town. And so these kids from the town of Mill Valley down below, these little boys, I think it was 5 12-year-old boys heard about it, and once school let out, they decided to hike up and take a look for themselves. And it was real easy because the freaking crash was still smoldering. There was a huge plume of smoke going up in the air. And so these boys, I mean, this is how kids used to be back in the day before video games. They just hiked up this mountain, bearing for the plume of smoke, until they came on the crash site. Look, there's another American flag. That's where a second body was recovered. There were 8 servicemen in total who lost their lives in this crash. And we will be naming them and giving them all a moment of silence at the end of this video. Anyway, these 5 12-year-old boys came up here, found the crash site. I mean, this was just, what, 12 hours after it crashed, 13, 14 hours later. So they saw the bodies and the fire, and I guess it was just really traumatic for them. They said they had nightmares for years afterwards. And so they ran to the closest house, which was that resort bar where the lady had called the police first thing in the morning. They didn't believe her, and they were like, "We need to use your phone. We just saw the plane crash. There's bodies. They're burning. They need help." And so this time they called the police, and they're like, "No, listen, we were just there. We saw it." And so finally, the police believed him and came up here and started the recovery effort. But it was like 14, 15, 16 hours later. And so by then, unfortunately, everybody was already dead. I mean, it was such a terrible crash that they probably all died on impact anyway. And so even though it was 14 hours later, I guess it really didn't matter. But by that point, now everybody in town had heard about what was going on. And so next thing you know, a bunch of local teenagers decided to come up and snoop around. But remember, this was 1944, the greatest generation. So even the teenagers weren't that bad. They came up and they ended up helping the police to carry the bodies and the whatever important stuff away from the crash site. Because it's very rugged terrain here. I mean, you can see we're on the side of this friggin' mountain. You saw Terry and me trying to bushwhack around here until those 2 nice lads showed us the trail. Well, there was no trail back then. It was straight up bushwhacking, and it couldn't have been very easy. So thankfully, these local teenagers came up, helped with the recovery effort. But then I guess, even though it was the greatest generation, teenagers have always been teenagers. And so they did come back up and loot a lot of stuff from this site. In fact, I guess there was still a lot of personal effects scattered about in the wreckage. And sadly, these teenage hoodlums took some of that. Now, how do I know that for sure? Well, there happened to be a little girl down in the town of Mill Valley. When she heard about all this, you know, it was the talk of the town. I'm sure the next day at school, the 5 12-year-olds who found the site originally, they were probably not in school. I would think they'd be too traumatized. But if they were, you know, I'm sure everybody was talking about it. And so this little girl decided, you know, when the names of the 8 deceased crewmen were released, she decided to write postcards. She got 8 postcards that had a picture of Mount Tamalpais on them. And she put a little mark right at the site where the plane went down. And she wrote really nice postcards to all the families of the 8 victims saying, you know, "I'm so sorry about what happened to your family member. Here's a picture of where they died, their final resting place. At least it's a beautiful spot." I don't know exactly what she said, but apparently she got responses from all of them. They were all very grateful for her for whatever information she gave them, because they weren't getting very much info from the police. I think the military might have kind of covered it up because it was a military operation during wartime, so they probably couldn't just put all the details in the news. And so these family members were really touched that this little girl would have taken the trouble to send in these postcards with whatever information she had. Now, one of the family members, one of the guys who died in this crash. Okay, I went ahead and made a list of all the crew members who died in this crash. So you can see here, Patrol Plane Commander Lieutenant Joseph L. Wrestley out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. Lieutenant Thomas Oliver, Jr., the first pilot of Valdosta, Georgia. Ensign Chapin B. Miller, second pilot of West Newton, Massachusetts. Harry L. Holland, Chief Aviation Machinist Mate, Plane Captain of Hawkinsville, Georgia. Rodney Jeffers, Aviation Machinist Mate, second class, first machinist of Jersey City, New Jersey. Oh, Jersey boy. Thomas J. Joyce Jr., Aviation Radio Man, second class, first radio man of Bel Air, Ohio. John R. Kelly, Aviation Radio Man, third class, second radio man of Dover Plains, New York. And finally, Wayne D. Paxton, Aviation Ordnanceman, second class, first ordnanceman of Riverside, California. Okay, those were the 8 brave men who lost their lives at this site. So let's just take a minute and give these guys a little respect. Terrible. Okay, but like I was saying, the last guy I mentioned, Wayne Paxton, when that little girl wrote postcards to all the family members, well, I guess Wayne Paxton had just gotten married 2 weeks before he died. I mean, he had just finished his honeymoon, and he was setting off on this flight to Pearl Harbor. And so his young wife, I mean, she was still a teenager herself, she got the postcard, and she thanked the girl who wrote it and, you know, asked her if she could maybe try to go up there and find his pocket watch, and I don't know, I guess he had a ring or a few personal items. And so the girl, I think she even published it in the paper, like, hey, this guy's widow is looking for his pocket watch and his ring or whatever. And sadly, they were never found. So that makes me think that one of these teenage hoodlums came up here and looted that stuff and never saw fit to return it, which is a crying shame. Okay, so we saw that one flag up at the top, and then there's a second flag there, but there's got to be 6 more flags marking the sites where the other bodies were found here. But golly, you know how it is with an air crash. I mean, the wreckage just gets scattered so far, especially when it's on a steep hillside like this, you know? In fact, those 2 boys told us that one of them went on a field trip when he was in 3rd grade to some place up here where there's still one of the engines. But he said he couldn't remember how to get there. It's way off trail, just hidden in the forest somewhere by a creek. And, well, I mean, I guess I could bushwhack around here all dang day looking for it, but that just doesn't seem very smart. I mean, I was going to kind of just poke around and see if I could find any more American flags, but I don't know, man. It seems like most of the debris is just right back up there on the hill, so I don't know where those other 6 flags could be. I mean, you would think the bodies would have all ended up sort of near each other, but yeah, I don't know. I guess with the impact of the collision, you can never tell. Wow, there's some pretty substantial chunks of wreckage left, even to this day. Really terrifying and really sad. Like, look at this. Wow. I mean, I guess that was the original military green color of the plane. Gosh. And yeah, there are weirdos who will take stuff like this and then just keep them at home in some kind of weird collection. I don't understand why people loot plane crash sites. It's basically no different than grave robbing, and I'm certainly not going to do it. I'm just going to kind of poke around and look at some of this debris because I think it's really interesting and really sad. Okay, Terry just pointed out that there's one other very interesting aspect to this story that I neglected to mention. So I'm going to go back up here to the top of the crash site where the first flag is and where that informational stuff is hanging from the pole. Oh, look, too. There's pictures of all the guys who died in the crash. Oh, just terrible. Look, there's the captain, Joseph Wesley. He looks like a nice guy. Ensign Miller, Lieutenant Oliver, Thomas Joyce. Oh, look at him. What a stud. Look at this guy, Rodney Jeffers. Oh, man, he looks like an old movie star. Oh, so does this guy, John Kelly. There's Wayne Paxton. That's the guy who had just gotten married. And Harry L Holland. My respect, guys. Thank you for your service. I'm sorry you died so soon before the end of the war. Think about it. It was November 30th, last day of November of 44. The war ended in... well, I guess the Pacific Theater didn't end until August of 45, so less than a year later, man. That's what's... I did another video at a military crash site up in Idaho, I think, once. Same thing. These guys died, like, right before the end of the war. That just makes it even sadder. Anyway, the thing that Terry thought I should talk about, and it is very interesting, is right here on the second page. It says, rumors about the plane circulated almost immediately. When residents first reported the crash, military officials tried to explain that the explosion was from another plane dumping its fuel tanks. Remember, that's what I said. They told that first lady who heard the explosion, oh no ma'am, we've already talked to the pilot, they landed safely. Well, maybe they weren't just confused. Maybe it was a cover-up. Because then it says there were reports that the plane carried someone who was part of the Manhattan Project, which is the group that developed the atomic bomb. Okay, Oppenheimer, everybody. It just says there were reports. I don't know where those reports came from, if there's any credence to those reports. But it also says that the boys who discovered the plane reported that they found strange orange Japanese bicycles strewn about. Strange orange Japanese bicycles. Interesting, and I guess there's a local historian who says she doesn't know anything about that, and almost seems like they tried to cover that up too. And okay, maybe the boys were just traumatized and they were only 12 years old, so maybe they were wrong and there wasn't a bunch of weird orange bicycles strewn about. Or maybe there were a bunch of strange orange Japanese bicycles strewn about. Remember, we are in the birthplace of mountain biking. What if the US military was the actual original inventor of the mountain bike? What if the mountain bike was invented as a tool of war? What if these guys were taking a bunch of mountain bikes over to Japan to do a land invasion? An elite Marin County mountain biking squadron. Boy, you never hear about those guys. Okay, I think the idea of an elite Marin County mountain biking squadron is probably a little bit far-fetched, but I don't know if these boys said they saw a bunch of orange bicycles. I'll bet you anything. Well, that was 80 years ago. I was going to say I bet you those boys are still alive, but if they were 12 at the time, 80 years ago, they're 92 now. If any of those boys are still alive and happen to be watching this video, let us know in the comments below if you really remember seeing a bunch of weird orange bikes and if you remember any details about them. I mean, I thought some dude named Gary Fisher invented the mountain bike, but I don't know, maybe Gary Fisher really was a secret U.S. military operative. Okay, look, I don't mean to make light of this whole thing because this is a terrible story and these guys did die in the service of their country. So before I leave this site, I'm just going to do one more look at the wreckage. And I'm really bummed that I wasn't able to find more American flags because it would have been nice to pay tribute to each of the 8 guys, but I just wanted to look at this wreckage one more time because it's really interesting to think that this stuff is from 80 years ago, okay? This fabric here, I don't know, it's like some kind of fiber, well, I was gonna say fiberglass, it's stiff, but whatever it is, 80 years that's been sitting up here on this mountain for all the rainstorms and, well, I don't think they get snow here, but, you know, rain, maybe hail, wind, blistering sun. It's amazing that it's still in this good a shape. And for that matter, all this wreckage it's amazing that people haven't come and looted all of it. Oh man, look at that kind of cool lattice work. I wonder what that would have been. Oh my God, look at this. Is this like the fuel line? Oh my God, it's so sad, but it's so interesting to poke through this stuff. You know, I could be up here all dang afternoon and it's still not gonna bring any of these servicemen back to life, which, well, it's been 80 years now and they were all in their 20s, so they too would probably have already passed away by now. It's just a long forgotten story about some long forgotten lives that actually, thanks to whoever put this memorial up, are not forgotten after all, which I think is pretty cool.